Good morning YouTube and welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we finally start work on the M240i. So this is my missus's car, 2016, straight six, like B58 engine, good for around, well, according to Surrey Rolling Road, most make 350 brake at the flywheel standard, so truly capable little package. And she has wanted for ages to make it actually look like a proper little M car, because from the outside they're really nicely looking. You can see it's obviously got the big calipers, they've got the power, same sort of power really as an E46 M3 which I've got. So we're going to actually make it look like it deserves that. So the first thing in today's video is going to be wheels, springs and tyres. So I've just dropped my missus off at work, so we're obviously using the car for the day to get these bits done. It's currently got a set of old Super Sport tyres on it, and to be honest with you, they feel well past it, especially in the wet and the cold. The grip is awful. So first job for this morning is going to be going to visit Stan, the wheel furb man, and that's not because the new wheels I bought need refurbishing. I'm just really picky with who fits tyres, because I've seen so much damage come over the years from people who don't know what they're doing. I'm just like, at least with him, I know it's going to be done right and it's going to be done the first time. So we're going to go back now, go and get the wheels, and like I say, I'll give you a quick rundown on what the build series is going to be about. So I'll try and remember all off the top of my head. So Series 1, which is obviously what we're doing now, wheels, tyres and suspension. We've gone with the CM M359 18-inch replica wheels. Now, I will put all the dimensions up in this part of the video. Hopefully I'll have a clip where I can show you the tyre sizes, the offsets and everything I've gone for. But I think what have we gone for? I'll have to pull it over there, I can't even remember now. But they're essentially, they look identical to the E92 M3 wheels, but they're in an 18-inch. And like I say, the idea is to sort of make it a little baby E92 M3 looks-wise, because I love how the car stands now. And like I say, my partner loves it too. And I said to her, do you know what? Let's make it look like that. We've got the right colour already. They do all the parts to make it possible. And as I say, that's what we'll be doing in the first episode. Episode 2 will be all the styling. So I've got the M3 style mirror caps, I've got the black grills, I've got the corner splitters like the E92 M3, I've got the spoiler like the E92 M3. The only thing obviously we won't have is the carbon roof. I definitely will not be paying for that to be done. But essentially, once it's lowered on the wheels and the grills and the spoiler and the splitter, hopefully it will be looking the part, which obviously will be episode 2. Episode 3 will be where it gets exciting, so remap time. Like I say, I've seen these things push 400 brake effortlessly with just very, very minor work. So definitely want to do a remap, wake the engine up a little bit, and more importantly, get a little bit more out the ZF gearbox. So the Autobox daily driving, absolutely brilliant. But when you put it into sport mode, it's a little bit better, but it's no means a DCT gearbox. It certainly doesn't encourage you to flip the paddles over to manual and have a play with it. So I'm hoping if we can get the gearbox mapped, it'll be like a different car to drive in terms of actually enjoyment, the punch through the box. Like the DCT gearbox in the E92 M3, yes, it's not the smoothest, but when you're on point, it is just incredible. It works so well. Episode 4. Well, episode 4 is going to be an uncertain one until we've had all the work done. Personally, I think it's going to need the M Performance limited slip differential, because already you can one tyre fire this pretty easily, so let alone once you start adding more power to it. So it's definitely something I want to do at a later stage. Whether it'll be something that happens this year obviously will be the question, but we'll see how it drives. We've gone from obviously the Super Sport tyres to what we're going to fit today, which is the Michelin 4s. Unfortunately we can't get the 4S's in an 18, but that in itself should make a huge difference to obviously how the grip and the traction improves. And we've gone slightly wider as well. I've gone 10mm wider on the rear and 10mm wider on the front. I think we're going to be running a 255 on the rear and a 245 on the front. But again, I'll overlay all the dimensions, so if you guys do want to check out CM Wheels' Instagram page or their website and you want to order up the same spec, obviously I'll make sure that's fully listed in the description as well for you guys. So yeah, big thanks to CM Wheels for getting those out to us. It's been probably the biggest delay in getting this project started because of everything that's happening with this COVID malarkey. They've just been out of stock for ages, and you know what, the quality of them when they arrived, I'm actually really impressed with them. For something that cost, I think they're about £530 for the set, like, especially if you try to do a genuine set of originals, it costs you an absolute fortune. But obviously they don't do an 18-inch in the M359 style, which is the wheel that we're fitting today. So yeah, next job, go to Stan, get home, get the suspension on, fingers crossed all goes to plan. So yeah, see you in a bit. One thing I did forget to mention, and I'm sure many of those with white cars can relate, is this time of year, oh man, it is just a nightmare. The roads in the UK are just awful. And like I said, we're going to start taking the suspension apart. It's a 2016 car, so I'm hoping nothing's seized, but it was absolutely filthy last weekend. I gave it a wash and it's already getting dirty again. It's just, oh, I hate this time of year for being a car owner. This is where you just want something horrible daily wise that you're not bothered about, but we do what we do, we love it, and I'm out there in 5 degrees washing the cars to keep them looking fresh, but it certainly looks great when it's clean again. So we are back in the car, we've got everything on. Unfortunately, the day just, oh man, it's always the way. You set yourself what you think is enough time to do a job, and it just didn't go to plan. Not because it was a bad job, just one thing after another. I had to go and pick my missus up as well in the evening because we borrowed the car. So what I've done is I'm going to run through the full fitting now. I think I've got plenty of clips that will hopefully give you guys enough information. As you can see in the intro, I did manage to get 4 wheels and 4 tyres in here. Yes, it was a tight squeeze. There were certainly going to be no passengers, but it is doable if you're in the same position. So following on from that last clip, obviously all the new wheels and tyres were fitted, and man, it makes such a difference. The spacing, absolutely perfect. I'm really happy with the width that the wheels obviously fitted onto the stock 240i. Now, Why did I go all the way to Stan to get the wheels fitted? I mean, it's one of those things. I don't know if there are others out there like me. I'm always very particular who touches the cars. And Stan, for me, it's like being with a friend for the day. I always have a good catch up with him. I'm always really happy with his work, his attention to detail. So I'm happy to take a 20-25 minute drive for him to fit the tyres up. Now, because they are a replica wheel, they're not obviously a genuine BMW wheel, past experience has normally told me that they do require a bit of weight to get them balanced correctly, but I was pleasantly surprised with these from CM Wheels, 20 to 30 grams a wheel, which even for genuine BMW even wheels, you can put 15-20 grams on them. So really happy with the quality of the pattern wheels that we fitted in the video. So with the car back home on the driveway, it was obviously time to get the Eibach springs fitted. Now the wheels looked great, they were the perfect width for the car, but unfortunately the standard ride height was just way too high, and I knew that from day one that it was going to need addressing. So I've bought a set of Eibach springs. Now normally from experience, if the springs from Eibach are black, they're a Pro line, which is a progressively wound spring, and then if they're red, they're the Sport line. So I ended up just buying them from a company online. I'll put the link in the description. What's weird is there wasn't any part numbers on the box. It was almost like they'd been taken off. So they are brand new. I just don't know whether they were designed maybe for another model, and to save confusion they've peeled the label off, but they were £200 all in for the 4 brand new. And like I say, I've been driving the car around now for the last week and a half, and it's absolutely spot on. It feels firmer than before, but not crashy or broken. And the ride height, oh man, it just looks so good. So we'll go through that now in this part of the video. Obviously following this guide is completely at your own risk. So before I get into the guide, I do want to say a big thanks for my best friend Matt for coming round to give me a hand. It is doable on your own, but as I've learnt with these things, it's always helpful to have one, another pair of hands, and two, like me, if you're filming, it means someone else can get the camera handy while you're busy struggling or swearing away at it. So yeah, big thanks to Matt for coming over and lending a hand for the day. And like I say, there are various methods that you can do this. There are some that say remove the lower control arm, pull it all out, but for me, kept the lower control arm in place, left the damper fitted to the hub, and managed to wiggle it all out that way, which I'll detail now. So the first job is getting the car all jacked up. Now, for me, I do it via the central jacking points, which I've always done with the M cars. On the M240i, I wasn't actually sure it had one. I had to go online and look for it, and there's actually a section underneath which is, it's got a hole in the under tray, and there's like a square pad underneath that, and you can jack the center of the car on there. If, like me, your jack's a little bit too high, what you can do is actually jack one of the side jacking points normally, bring it up to a good level, and then get your jack underneath. So for me, I've always jacked from the front and the rear jacking points. Now the front, like I say, needs to be elevated together, same as the rear, otherwise you'll be fighting the anti-roll bar, which will just make life an absolute pig to do this job. So get the front and the rear in the air. With the rear, again, something I'd always been told against was jacking on the diff. Now for the M240i, the BMW manual for jacking is actually on the diff, and that's not the diff casing on the back, the actual main part of the diff. And I'll overlay an image now from the BMW screenshot, hopefully it makes sense. But yeah, you jack the rear up, and then you can put the whole car on 4-axle stand, so it's nice and solid for you to work on it. So with the car completely jacked up, you can now remove all 4 wheels. Now, like I say, it's worth doing it like this, because otherwise you're going to have tension in the anti-roll bar, which will make it an absolute nightmare trying to remove the drop links if you have one side down and one side up. So remove all the wheels, and once the wheels are off, you can then see the calipers, you can see all the ABS sensors, the electronic damping, which the 240i has got on this model, and you've got to essentially unclip all that and get it all out of the way. Next, you simply need to remove the anti-roll bars from the dampers. Now, it's pretty simple. I think it was a 16mm spanner and a Torx bit as well. I'll try and overlay it over the bottom if I've got it from memory, but it's pretty straightforward. You lock it in place, remove it, and then I just gently wind the nut back on just to keep it all out of the way so you can work on the suspension. Before going any further, I strongly suggest removing the leveling sensor. Now, normally, which I've always done on the M cars, is I've undone the 2 nuts. There's like a little 10mm nut, you can just back it off, slides out of the way, and if you don't undo it, when you lower the lower arm, it'll end up absolutely destroying the leveling sensor. But this time, for whatever reason, I thought, do you know what, I'll just get a lever bar on there and pop it off the knuckle. My advice, don't do that, because unfortunately all it did was actually pull it out from the joint on the little bracket. So thankfully, easy enough fix, but it just added 30-40 minutes to the job. So for the front and rear, you just get 2 10mm spanners, and you can just simply wind the nut off. And again, I would advise this method, because I tried to pop it off the knuckle and all it did was actually damage the bracket, which has then turned into what should be a relatively quick 5-minute job into about 30-40 minutes. So always the way when tinkering, do not try to cut corners. Next, you simply need to unplug all the sensors. So like I say, on this model, I've got the electronic damping, you've got the brake pad wear sensor on one side, and you've also got the ABS sensor. And you make sure you remove these from the brackets and unplug them, because when we eventually lower the hub down and pull the damper out, you'll end up damaging the cables if you leave her on them. So certainly worth removing. With that done, I then used a small scissor jack. Now this was from the boot of my old Honda S2000, and it's really good because you can support the lower hub, wind it up or down, gently lower all the forks, the damper assembly down, and raise it all back up. Obviously, do not jack on the disc. I've seen videos from garages doing this, like especially with cars like on the M cars when they've got floating discs. Do not jack on the disc. There's actually the ball joint right on the wishbone, and as you'll be able to see in this clip, that's where you position it, and that takes all the load for you to be able to move the whole damper assembly up and down. Moving into the engine bay, simply pop the bonnet and you're greeted by all the plastic trims that are on top of the dampers. And as I say, they're not difficult to remove at all, just fiddly. Take your time, don't force anything because you'll break it. And once they're all unclipped, you'll then be greeted with a load of 13mm nuts that hold the top of the top mount onto the damper, and one E-Torx bit. Now, I thought that I had the correct E-Torx for this. I thought my little assembly of them would be the right size, but unfortunately not. So there is a little trick for this. So as mentioned, the little tip that I've got, and again, this is something you do at your own risk because there is a chance that you could round it, is I actually used an imperial socket. Now, it wasn't any major load and it didn't slip or move, which was great. And the imperial socket will just slide over the place of an E-Torx, allowed me to crack it off, and when I put it all back together again, it retorqued perfectly. Otherwise, I was going to have to drive out, go to the local auto factors to try and find just that one E-socket that I needed for the job. So thankfully, this does work, but again, follow it at your own risk. So now for the hardest part, of all the 13mm bolts removed from the top mount and that one E-Torx bit, the whole assembly essentially will be supported by that scissor jack. So as I say, do one side at a time. You then can just slowly wind the jack down, the scissor jack, and all of a sudden you'll be able to see the top mount and the spring all in the arch. Now this, like I say, is the hardest part of the job, and this is where the two-person comes in, is if you can get your friend or your spare pair of hands to stand just on the, basically the hub part of the disc, not on the actual disc, and they'll just be able to slightly take the load out of it all. And then you're going to have to squeeze the whole assembly out of the arch, being very, very careful. One, not to damage the brake hose, and two, not to catch the wing because you'll make an absolute mess of it. And what I did, and it really made a big difference, was I positioned my spring clamps, which you're going to need anyway if you're taking the front springs off, onto the spring in the arch, compress the assembly, and it was just a case of pull it all down, lift it out, and then it was clear of the car. Now, if you've got a towel or a microfiber, you can put it on the top mount or you can cover the wing. But the problem is, if you don't take that tension out of the spring, and again, it's hard because we were both hands-on trying to do it rather than film it, is it will soon make sense when you do it, is as you pull down on the top mount, it's obviously got the weight trying to pull it back up, and if you get halfway into the arch and end up coming back up on the wing, you'll do loads of damage. So you're going to need the spring clamps, as I mentioned. It makes sense just to compress them, and obviously you can then take the whole assembly out without actually removing the damper from the hub, which they can seize, and then it turns into a right long day. So for us, that's the method we use, again, following it at your own risk. So with the assembly now clear of the car, and obviously being careful not to push it onto the bodywork, you can now remove the top mount. But before you do that, all the tension needs to be taken out of the spring, and for that you'll need those spring clamps again. And what I do is I remove them, position them correctly, pinch them all the way down, and then if you've taken all the load out of the spring, you should almost be able to move the spring loosely inside the damper and the top mount, and that shows you've got no load on it. So there's a big 18mm nut in the top. I used an impact gun, but you do need to be careful, because if you don't support the rod and you rotate the impact gun, you can end up damaging the seals in it. Obviously, with it being an electric damper, it's very expensive. With the assembly apart, you'll now be able to remove the spring and all the top mount assembly. In the new kit, mine actually came with slightly shorter bump stops. So obviously, because the car's going to be sitting a little bit lower, it is worth fitting them. It's just a case of popping the foam out of the old top mount and fitting the new ones. And like I say, the fronts have dropped. It appears to be about 20mm, and those new bump stops look about 20mm shorter, which If you don't swap them over or you don't have them in the kit, there is a chance that you could end up bottoming the car out on the bump stops, which isn't good because it gives you bad handling and a horrible ride. So as they're included, it takes 2 seconds, swap them over and the new bump stops are in place. So with the top mount now fitted with a new bump stop, it's time to put the new spring in place. And it's pretty straightforward. It goes in exactly the same position as the standard one, but you do need to be careful that the spring is seated correctly. Now on the bottom of the damper and in the top mount, you'll see there's almost like a stop or a cutout where the spring sits. It does need to be flush against those, because if it doesn't, when you put it all back together, you can hear the twanging of springs moving. It won't sit properly. So always ensure that before you put the top mount on, the spring is sat happily. Once that's done, because the spring is shorter, you can simply push the top mount over, put a little bit of force down on it and wind the nut on by hand to get it started. So I didn't need the spring clamps to put it all back together. Once that's done, torque the nut down, put all the assembly back together in the reverse of the way you took it all apart, and make sure you torque everything up. And then essentially that is the front's done. And the front is the worst part. The rears, which we'll go on to now, is really quick. But like I say, double check everything, make sure all your sensors are plugged in, all the brackets are clipped back, everything is free of the cables, and like I say, you don't want it catching on anything, and you're done on the fronts. So on to the rear. Thankfully a lot more straightforward than the front. Again, with the car all jacked up on axle stands, you want all that load off the wheels. You can remove the rear wheels and tyres out the way, so you've got plenty of access. The first thing again is those epoxy leveling sensors. On the rear, again, you can just use 2 10mm spanners, undo that, move it out of the way, because if you don't, when you start forcing down on the arm, you'll damage the leveling sensor, which I can't imagine is a cheap day out from BMW. With that leveling sensor removed, you can then, I don't know what they are, they're like aero shields on the bottom of the wishbones, which are just held on with 4 10mm nuts. It's a real shame they didn't have some sort of channels in them for brake cooling. They look like they're just potentially for aerodynamics, I don't know. But they bolt to the bottom of the wishbone, 4 10mm nuts, and then they simply drop out of the way. So with the aero shields out of the way, it's now time to do the big bolts on the rear. Now it's going to be the same for both sides. You've got one bolt that goes through the lower damper body, and then you've got another big bolt that goes into the hub. And again, it goes back to that issue. If you haven't got big e-Torx bits, you can use an imperial socket, which I've done again and had no issues. But again, completely at your own risk. Now once those two are undone, it's just a case of pull the bolts out. It'll need a bit of wiggling and a bit of fighting. You might need a jack to take the load off the hub. It was pretty straightforward for me, nothing was seized thankfully. And then once those two are out, you can literally just hang on the lower wishbone, the spring falls out, remove the standard spring, there's 2 rubber caps on each end, make sure they're seated on your new spring, put it back up in position, and it's literally just a case of position it, put a trolley jack underneath, and then you want to jack the lower wishbone until you're roughly in the position that the hub bolt lines up. And then once the hub bolt's in position, you can essentially just lift and manhandle the damper into position. Put those nuts and bolts back in there. Again, repeat on the other side. Job's a good one. So with everything back together, obviously double check all your torque settings, put all your wheels back on, lower the car back on the ground, and you're done. Now, generally as a rule of thumb I've always followed is you leave a car for around a week to settle, and that's not just for the weight to be on the springs, it's more to do with actually the bushes and everything so that they're seated correctly. And like I say, if you went and tracked it the moment you fitted it, you may actually find the car drops a little bit afterwards anyway. So always give the car a week, but whatever you do, don't leave it for months on end, as the geo will just absolutely destroy the tyres, especially with the sort of drop we've had here. But yeah, man, what a day. And overall it's actually starting to look really cool now. Now obviously it's going to need all the cosmetic trims that we're doing in the next video to really tie it in, but I'm absolutely chuffed to bits with it. The missus is absolutely thrilled with it, and I didn't actually expect the front to sit as low as it has, so I'm really pleased with how it's looked. But that does bring me on to one potential modification. I was potentially looking at doing the M4 lower control arm, but looking online they're saying that it could lower it another 5 to 10 mil, which is definitely not what I want, because at the moment this is as low as it needs to be for her for general driving at the moment. And like I say, she's got a place of work where it's near speed bumps and stuff, so happy with how it sits at the moment. Unfortunately probably going to have to leave the M4 lower control arm set up unless I can find a way of keeping the ride height at the front the same. But yeah, really excited for the next video. Obviously we're going to get all of the cosmetic bits done, and as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a few more chapters of this build to go. So if you have enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, until next time.